first things first, could Golden Freddy be a pure hallucination, and could that really make any sense? I mean, he seems to cause hallucinations for us, but is that him controlling them, or are they just appearing alongside him? Well, by definition, hallucinations are an experience involving the apparent perception of something not present. So they're sensory experiences that appear real but are created by your mind. They can affect all 5 of your senses as well, not just sight. And for example, you might hear a voice that no one else can hear in the room, or you can see an image that isn't real, or maybe even feel the texture of something that isn't actually there. I remember that as a kid, once I either was dreaming or hallucinated my basement being filled with boulders that I had to clean out. I don't know why I thought it was my job, but that kind of explains a lot now. My parents didn't see them though, and then just kept telling me to go to bed. They thought I was doing a bit or something, but this definitely explains a lot. Hallucinations though may be caused by mental illness, the side effect of medications, or physical illnesses like epilepsy or alcohol use. Not getting enough sleep can also lead to hallucinations. You may be more prone to hallucinations if you haven't slept in multiple days or didn't get enough sleep over longer periods of time, and it's also possible to experience hallucinations right before falling asleep, known as hypnagogic hallucinations, or right before waking up from sleep, known as hypnopompic hallucinations, which is why sometimes you may hear a voice or something that sounds like a voice while you're dozing off. But it's also not just limited to sleep. High fevers, migraines, social isolation, seizures, terminal illness, and high levels of stress can all also cause hallucinations. And honestly, based on the first game alone, I can see why we would have high levels of stress and probably be sleep deprived. I mean, our shift is from 12 to 6 AM, and that's only the part that we actually get to play, and I'm sure the working environment is pretty awful, and we're alone the whole time, which not only increases the stress, but the feelings of social isolation as well. And that's only within the first game. If we want to talk about the series as a whole, we play as Michael Afton in basically every game, with the exception of a few. So we can use this to kind of understand what's really going on. In the cutscenes to Sister Location, we learn that Michael was used as a vessel to help Ennard and whoever was inside of Ennard to escape the underground facility that's the main setting for that game. However, in the process, we end up becoming purple from all the bruising, because you know, metal parts are moving inside of us, and the neighborhood we live in ends up becoming afraid of us. See the "you won't die" scene for proof of that one, because everyone is hiding behind their homes as we walk down the street and then eventually puke Ennard out. They start off loving us, waving and smiling, but eventually become terrified and actively avoid us. If that's not gonna start the feeling of social isolation, I don't know what is. And I know what is. And we know that the original games have to come after these events, because we're not only sent here by our father, who would have a tough time doing this trapped in a secret room, but also because of the cited reasons for being fired at the end of the original games. Odor is always listed, meaning that we've definitely been through some rough patches. And it's also worth noting that in Sister Location, where the stress, social isolation, and probably the sleep deprivation begin, Golden Freddy doesn't appear as an animatronic, but instead as a reference in the custom night menu, which can't really be considered canon, because in the actual story of the games you wouldn't be able to customize things. So Golden Freddy only starts showing up after Michael goes through extreme trauma, and seems to only be seen by Michael. Golden Freddy doesn't show up anywhere in promotional material for any of the restaurants, even before the Bite of 87, since him causing the Bite of 87 could be considered the reason why they stopped promoting him. But even in FNAF 2, which is just before the Bite of 87, since it may even take place during the events of that week, we don't see any art for the new Golden Freddy. While he does appear in the post-Night 3 cutscene, these are also referred to as the end of night hallucinations, meaning that they obviously aren't real. But also, it's an interesting point of contention. Here you would think that the theory would start to fall apart because, well, it's a hallucination, yes. At this point in the game, we're playing as Jeremy Fitzgerald, right? And while yes, during the main 5 nights we play as Jeremy, more on that later, that doesn't really mean that these hallucinations have to be his. Think about how the hallucinations are being presented, okay? They're the location from the first game, a game where we know we play as Michael Afton. Much like how Michael was part robot after his Sister Location fiasco, and we're inside the Freddy animatronic specifically, like how Michael would associate the character with the one who ended up killing his brother. And Golden Freddy shows up as another hallucination on top of that. These hallucinations are clearly meant to show us how Michael is figuring out what to do next. And not only are they showing the next location that he would go to, they're also what brings him to the FNAF 2 location. Notice how he sees the puppet after night 4 in game, and then we don't really get another end night cutscene. Simply because by night 6, we're actually playing as Mike. Sure, we get a check that says says that Jeremy worked overtime, but really? Making or even letting an employee work overtime after one of your animatronics removed his frontal lobe? Yeah, no, that check is cleverly disguised hush money from an already shady company. Michael gets there on night 6 and takes over, only to get fired shortly thereafter. On the pink slip it says on the first day, really? But that seems to be one of those I think thou doth protest too much kind of things. Like, why do you feel the need to point that out on this pink slip? The notes section is for reasoning behind the firing and explanations, especially in a legal sense, so those who get fired can't really try and file wrongful termination suits, or at least if they do, they won't really have much legs. We also know that Fritz Smith is Michael Afton using an alias since he gets fired for the same reasons Michael does in the first game. The logical extension of that being that they're the same person, who had to change their name again when they applied to the next place because, you know, the company would have a record of Fritz Smith being fired. And considering how Fritz is one of the missing children's names, yeah, it's meant to be a fake name. Nobody other than Mike seemingly can see Golden Freddy, and whenever we do see him, it's never operational, and it's never in a tangible sense. In all forms, Golden Freddy is slumped over, there's no light in his eyes, and he's always in our office. We don't see him on a camera at any point, so where the hell on earth could he have come from if he is using supernatural abilities to move himself? Some explain this in the first game by saying that he was hiding out in the kitchen since the camera wasn't working, but in FNAF 2, we don't have any cameras that aren't functional, so where on earth could he have come from? It doesn't make sense even with the FNAF universe logic. Hell, we even see Shadow Freddy on the cameras, but not Golden Freddy. Huh. Weird. Speaking of his weird abilities, what's with the whole crashing us to the desktop thing? Every other animatronic sends us to the main menu, but Golden Freddy sends us to our desktop. That's a very odd detail that I don't think anyone is really questioning, but it certainly seems to indicate that there is something special about this character. And I don't think that it's that they're just angrier than the other ones, because that wouldn't really change anything. I think it's more symbolic than that. You see, the only other character that when killing us crashes us to our desktop is Nightmare from FNAF 4, and that is not a coincidence. FNAF 4 is where we see the inciting moment that starts all of this trauma for Michael, where he feels guilty for getting his brother killed despite it not really being his fault. Sure, he put his brother's head in the animatronic mouth, but William is the one who made the mouth intentionally superpowered. When I've said this in the past, in previous videos, at one point someone used the analogy of if someone puts your hand under a hydraulic press and then your hand is crushed, it's not the person who made the hydraulic press's fault. And you know what? You're right, that's true. However, if that hydraulic press was designed to stop before it reached the hand, or it wasn't supposed to have enough power to actually crush a hand, then the manufacturer who gave it too much power or messed it up, it's them at fault. Or I guess, technically, a better analogy would be if your car's airbags don't deploy during an accident, since that's more realistic than a hydraulic press stopping. In a settlement reached following mediation, attorneys Alan Feldman, Daniel Mann, and Edward Goldis obtained a multi-million-dollar recovery on behalf of a teenage girl who suffered catastrophic brain injuries in a car accident. Her car slid off the road during a rainstorm and struck a tree broadside, and the head curtain airbags and the chest and thorax airbags in the vehicle failed to deploy during the accident. They could prove that if the car had been manufactured correctly, the girl wouldn't have suffered any injuries, and thus the company settled instead of taking it to court. The same principle applies here. Had this not have been William's own child, if the family who lost their kids sued William, he would have been cleaned out. But of course, Michael didn't know that it wasn't his fault at the time. He learned that after Sister Location, which sets him on his journey. But going back to the connection between Golden Freddy and Nightmare, they're the only two animatronics that crashes to the desktop. And while with Golden Freddy that may not make much sense, with Nightmare having the same ability, it sets a baseline for what's really going on when this happens. Nightmare in FNAF 4 is representative of death. He's the dark shadow that's coming after Crying Child during his coma in the hospital after the bite of 83. Notice how Nightmare is a shadow version of Nightmare Fredbear, Fredbear being the animatronic that he would be most afraid of, because you know, it's the one that crushed him. And his Ultimate Custom Night voice lines support this idea. Quote, "I am here to claim what is left of you. You will not be spared, you will not be saved, and I am your wickedness made of flesh. All of these are indicators that Nightmare is meant to be death, especially in FNAF 4. And when Nightmare gets us, we crash to the desktop. We truly die. Not like when the other animatronics get us and we go back to the main menu. This time around, we're actually jump scared to death. The same must be the case for Golden Freddy, and considering how Nightmare is in essence also a hallucination, it would make sense for Golden Freddy to be able to jump scare us to death as well. A death that doesn't involve violence, and instead your heart giving out due to fear, hence the desktop crash. Golden Freddy being a hallucination would not only explain a lot, but it would also help clear things up. Golden Freddy being a real animatronic allows for Cassidy to be the one you should not have killed, since she can possess William without us having to worry about who's in the suit. The "It's me" line also makes sense now, since it would be referring to the animatronic that killed Mike's brother, or it could even be Mike assuming that Crying Child went on to possess the Fredbear animatronic because Mike knows that Elizabeth is possessing Baby, and it makes sense why we can't see Golden Freddy on the cameras, why he's never advertised, but also why he would be haunting William in Ultimate Custom Night, since William would also see Golden Freddy as the one who took his son. Well, at least if it is William in Ultimate Custom Night, since with this revelation now, it could be Mike. Cassidy could still be possessing William, but someone else may be possessing Michael, causing him to suffer since he blames his big brother for his death. Michael being the Ultimate Custom Night player explains why we would still see Golden Freddy in the final cutscene, it makes sense with the dialogue of the Ultimate Custom Night death screens, and it explains why Spring and Scrap Trap are there, because why would William be haunting himself? He doesn't seem to regret anything he's done. Michael being possessed by Crying Child explains why he knows what Nightmare Fredbear looks like, since he draws it in the survival logbook, and it explains why Cassidy and Crying Child could communicate in that book. Not because they share an animatronic, but because they share a purpose. To punish those who did them wrong, or I guess to punish those they consider the causes for their death. And then it allows for Michael to be possessing Glamrock Freddy for his redemption, because Crying Child was keeping him alive through FNAF 6's fire. Number 6, the one you should not have killed. If Golden Freddy is purely a hallucination, this opens a whole lot of doors, particularly in the identity of the one you should not have killed. You see, the original basis for my point of Crying Child being the one possessing Afton was that Golden Freddy being possessed by Cassidy prevented her from possessing anyone else. However, if Golden Freddy isn't real, then Cassidy can't really be possessing it, and that leaves the door open for Cassidy to possess William. Another issue I'd see would be that Crying Child, if they are to possess someone, it would end up being a relative, considering how he dies in the hospital, and since Crying Child dies in 1983 instead of 1985, he would end up possessing William first, and then Cassidy couldn't. But that's also assuming that Crying Child does possess someone and doesn't just pass into the great beyond once Nightmare gets him or once he survives him. However, Cassidy can be possessing William if, and at 5, Michael is possessed. If Michael was with his brother when he died, or the bite was the moment that triggered the possession due to intense agony despite him dying later, Michael being possessed also explains why he'd be seeing Golden Freddy. Because if the line of "It's me" is in fact Crying Child communicating with his older bro through hallucinations like my original theory stated, then Golden Freddy would just be a representation of the thing that killed Crying Child. Michael would also have been in the hospital when Crying Child died, since, you know, it is his brother after all. And this also helps everyone who was yelling at me in the comments, saying that he would blame his big brother for his death over his father. My original explanation was that he just possessed the closest thing to him, which could have been his father, and then only got vengeful once he saw what his father was doing. But if Golden Freddy is a hallucination, we need an explanation as to why, and Michael being possessed fits the bill. And it's more consistent than him just being tired, stressed, neglected, and all the other stressors that I mentioned in my theory on the subject. Although those are still perfectly valid and are probably not really helping. Michael being possessed by Crying Child and him causing hallucinations also explains the survival logbook. The wrong text and faded text isn't really two spirits having a conversation, but rather the hallucinations that Crying Child is making Mike see. And it also explains that the party we see at the end of FNAF 4 isn't for Crying Child, but rather for Michael. Hence the "party was for you" line being repeated multiple times, and why Michael had his friends there if the party was for his younger brother. Or the altered text could even be Michael's inner thoughts as he's realizing what has happened. This fixes a whole lot of other issues as well, allowing for William to be possessed by Cassidy, who taunts him in Ultimate Custom Night with the thing that had killed his son. It allows for Michael's hallucinations to be more based on FNAF lore than real world science, which in turn explains the clues that he gets in FNAF 3's minigames, and even explains why he thought thought punching a phone number onto the wall tiles would actually do something for him, and why it does. And it stops the stupid Golden Freddy was possessed by two souls theory brought on by the logbook, because if Michael was hallucinating, then I would doubt any of that is real, including the blood on the cover and within the book itself, because that was also an issue for me. Why would Fazbear Entertainment be like, here's a book and it's covered in blood? And at 4, FNAF 4 was a game. This would also mean that FNAF 4's main gameplay was actually a game. Now, I know that in Matt Pat's theory, he comes to the conclusion that the first 3 or 4 games aren't real. I haven't seen the whole thing as to not shift my judgment or bias my findings. However, I'd argue that the first 3 games would still need to be real, and not just at a random time of day with a notification that ironically interrupts you from being real. No, FNAF 1 through 3 would have to happen for the rest of the series to make sense. The outlier is FNAF 4, whose main gameplay can't really have happened, or at least, if it did, it wasn't what we thought. The FNAF 4 Between Night minigames have to be real, cause like that's the moment that really starts the whole everything getting possessed thing. But one thing that's always bothered me was the nightmare animatronics. If this is supposed to be crying child in a coma having these nightmares, how does Mike know what they look like, since he draws Fredbear's nightmare version in the survival logbook? One way could be that this was just kind of projected into his brain when crying child possessed him, or it could also be that these were simply Michael's nightmares, hence the alarm clock wake up and similar hours that he's had to previous jobs. But another could be that this character simply was one in the games that Scott's in-universe counterpart made, which I feel is the most likely explanation, since it also explains how the character made it into FNAF VR. That also brings up the issue of copyright law in the FNAF universe itself, since Fazbear Entertainment would have had to buy the rights to the nightmare version of the character off of Scott in-game. However, maybe they didn't, since FNAF VR did have a scandal when the first version of the cover art was revealed, since it had used a fan model in the art, thus violating copyright law, which is certainly an odd thing, since, you know, the man created the series, so how did he or anyone on a team accidentally use an asset that they would have had to find and download online? Wouldn't you like have those already, or wouldn't you just get them from Scott? Maybe it was a hint to how some of these characters would be violating in-universe copyright laws as well. We know some of these characters are real, like the original animatronics, but even Springtrap was a real animatronic, since the Fazbear Frights Ruins and Springtrap make a cameo at the end of Sister Location. So, FNAF 3 had to be real, otherwise it would have been Scraptrap showing up instead. And at 3, FNAF 3 ending explained. All of this also explains the FNAF 3 endings, and why Golden Freddy's head isn't present in the good one. Yes, no lights being on would make the head in the back harder to see, but that symbolism of being behind them, watching them from the shadows, isn't lost on me, and is explained as crying child watching these souls while possessing Michael. And when these souls are free, in that ending, we actually see the heads of the actual animatronics, like the physical heads. And since Golden Freddy was never real, there need not be a head for the character. Plus, Cassidy would still be possessing William at this point and thus not set free. Clearly, since, you know, the man survives the fire of that game. So the Golden Freddy in the Happiest Day minigame could very well just be crying child finally conquering his fear of Fredbear. Hence why Golden Freddy doesn't make an appearance in future games. Sister Location doesn't have one, or any hallucinations for that matter. Pizzeria Simulator is the same way, except I personally think that FNAF 6 is also a game. FNAF VR only had Easter eggs of the It's Me line, which has been found by few, and Easter eggs are a really gray area for this, especially when it's an Easter egg in a DLC. But even still, the character themselves doesn't show up. After FNAF 3, it seems like Crying Child has let go of his anger towards his brother and the fear of the animatronic, which is why he is no longer hiding in the shadows and no longer taunting Michael with visions. But ultimately, in at number 2, FNAF 6 is a game. If this Golden Freddy hallucination idea is true, and everything else that I've suggested is as well, since it would only make sense for all that to actually happen, that would mean that FNAF 6 is also one of the games. Not only is it another outlier like FNAF 4, but it's the only game to feature Scraptrap and Scrap Baby. Now keep this in mind, because like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, that is a special tool that we'll use for later. Because the whole point of FNAF 6 is tying up loose ends. It's ending the story. It's letting the remaining secrets of Fazbear Entertainment die off. Now, Henry aims to achieve this using a random person, seemingly, since he clearly states the job listing wasn't intended for Michael at the end of the game. And no matter how counterintuitive that may be, everything important here is kept a secret. Or well, I get the animatronics found in the back alley are. Scraptrap, Scrap Baby, Lefty, Molten Freddy, they're all very hush hush. They're left out back back at the end of your shift in the dark. They're kept away from any of the patrons, and anyone who knew about them is supposed to die at the end of the game, along with the location being buried as we see in Security Breach. And while the location and its fire may have been true, notice that Burn Trap is more like Spring Trap than Scrap Trap, despite Scrap Trap supposedly being the literal basis for Burn Trap. Like it would have to go directly from Scrap Trap to Burn Trap. Oh, and remember that surprise tool? The whole this is the only game to feature these? Combining that with anyone who knew about these being dead, how did these characters show up later? How did Scrap Baby make it into FNAF VR as a plush baby skin? And how are they both in Ultimate Custom Night? Nobody should have known enough to put her in FNAF VR, and then Ultimate Custom Night? Well, that also has the Nightmare Animatronics, who we've established as having to be game characters. Therefore, FNAF 4 being a game and the origin of the Nightmares makes any game featuring those in universe games as well. Ultimate Custom Night and VR also make mention of scrap characters, who then also have to be game characters, meaning that FNAFs 4, 6, and 7 are all video games made by Scott in universe. But most importantly, we can stop worrying about the Spring Trap to Scrap Trap to Burn Trap design changes, because in reality it went from Spring Trap to Burn Trap, and Scrap Trap was there to avoid copyright issues with Fazbear Entertainment. And finally, in at number 1, Michael isn't Glamrock Freddy. I'm sorry to break it to you guys, but this would also mean that Michael is not possessing Glamrock Freddy, and it could be for multiple reasons. One, it could be that Crying Child is still possessing him at the time of FNAF 6's fire, which would keep him alive, much like William in Burn Trap's suit. We know that Crying Child keeps possessing Michael after FNAF 3, given that he survives Ennard and then Ennard's departure, which it could only be done if he was possessed and being kept alive like William, unless Mike is a robot. 2, since FNAF 6 is a game, Mike may not really have been at the location when it burnt down. Henry may have done it all himself, or maybe actually he let Mike leave instead of, not giving him the choice like we see in the actual game, which basically resulted in Henry murdering Michael. Or the third scenario, which I personally prefer, that Scott's in-universe counterpart, the indie game dev who made FNAF 4, 6, and 7, is Michael, and that he used these games to tell a version of the story where he dies so that he can either live a more normal life or prevent suspicion from Fazbear Entertainment if they looked into his past a little too closely. And if I'm throwing another wild theory out there, what if the FNAF movie, the one using the Mike screenplay, will feature Scott Cawthon at his desk working on a game as an older version of Michael? There is a reason that he used himself for that photo and made sure we knew it wasn't Scott himself, because he knew that whenever he wanted to reveal the game dev's identity, he would be available. And if he used someone else, they may have not been able to make it to set for the final shot of the movie. Have been wrong this whole time? Those possibilities are what we're exploring today. Let's do it. In at 10, Crying Child. Okay, now this one is certainly going to be a bit controversial, but there is no way that I could have done this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates of my DMs ever. I say this every time I bring it up. I don't think that Crying Child's death was a Springlock failure, and I firmly believe that they are the one you should not have killed, meaning that they're the vengeful spirit possessing Afton and keeping him alive instead of being inside Golden Freddy. But with that being said, it's still possible that I'm wrong, okay? I'm man enough to admit it, and that's what this list is all about. Well, possibilities, not me being wrong. The idea that Crying Child is the one possessing Golden Freddy comes from the idea that the Fredbear animatronic that kills him in 1983 is converted into Golden Freddy come FNAF 1 in 1993, either because the Springlock suits got decommissioned despite this not being a Springlock failure, and then the Golden Freddy suit is just a shell, or because Afton didn't want to look at the thing that killed his son. And while this is a possibility, we know that Crying Child didn't actually die in the mouth of the suit. He died because of his head being crushed, yes, but he dies in the hospital as proven by the flatline at the end of FNAF 4. But I mean, everyone's gonna be mad at me for saying this anyway, so I guess I'm just not gonna read the video comments. In at 9, Jeremy Fitzgerald. At the end of every FNAF game, there's a bonus night. Then it gives you more lore clues, then it gives you more scares. But then after beating that one, you unlock a 7th night where you can customize the animatronics and give them like specific levels to see how hard you can really make it for yourself. However, if you were to do this in Five Nights 1, you'd obviously be looking for more clues, trying to figure out like the first in what would be an incredible series of games. If you tried to solve this though by being sneaky and inputting the animatronic levels to be 1, 9, 8, and 7, the year of the infamous bite, or at least the first one, you'd end up getting instantly jump scared by Golden Freddy, which, while hilarious, is still creepy and unexpected. I mean, like, I get that Scott wanted to shut rumors down about there being like a secret camera or something, but like, why couldn't this just be a normal night that's proved them wrong because it wasn't real. Like, what if someone wanted to actually have those levels for whatever reason, and then boom, they get spooked by Golden Freddy instantly? It's kind of rude, okay? But it's also interesting to think that the year 1987 would summon Golden Freddy. If you end up thinking about it, and end up thinking about it too much probably, that this could be an implication that Golden Freddy caused the bite of 87, and that Jeremy Fitzgerald, who we play as in FNAF 2, who many assume to be the bite victim, could be the one possessing the animatronic. At least if we ignore that the missing children's incident takes place 2 years prior. And it ain't multiple. The prevalent theory for Golden Freddy is that the animatronic is actually possessed by two souls. This idea comes from the survival logbook and the FNAF 3 bad ending 2-eye theory. The 2-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending there are two eyes lit up in the head in the back, which we are assuming is Golden Freddy, to show that there are two souls in the animatronic. Well, with regards to the 2-eye theory at least, that's incorrect. You see, it would actually be more difficult to tell that the thing in the back was an animatronic head if there was only one eye lit up, since all we see of this head are the eyes, and the light comes out of the other eye just due to the reflection of the first light, since it's that dark. Notice how Freddy also has some light coming out of his other eye. You can't really ignore how light works in this situation, okay? It's just like a fundamental law of everything. Plus, Crying Child, who many assume to be the second spirit, hadn't been introduced into the series yet, not coming until the next game that wasn't even going to happen originally, since this was supposed to be the bed of the series. That's why we released the Souls in the Happiest Day minigame. And notice that there's only one person wearing a Golden Freddy mask in the minigame. If there were two spirits that were intended at this stage, wouldn't there have been two kids wearing the mask? I mean, it was supposed to be the end after all. And according to the official Freddy Files Updated Edition book, quote, you'll see an image of broken animatronic heads, each with a lit eye. 1. In at 7, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. I mean, like, we know he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics ended up getting him and shoving him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the spring-lock suits were either still in operation or hadn't really been totally removed. I don't know, the actual timeline of events for the spring-lock suits is a little messy still, since we don't really have the years for things like them getting scrapped. Yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe used it to hide from them and then it failed. However, another theory is that he gets killed by Golden Freddy, which could mean that he might end up possessing the animatronic. We have to get the whole shadow animatronics thing somehow, right? Plus, we very clearly hear Golden Freddy in the recording of Phone Guy just before he dies, suggesting that they had a prominent part in his demise. I mean, like, it's highly unlikely, but honestly, Phone Guy is more important to us than Cassidy does, so it could make more sense. At least, if this wasn't after the missing children's incident. And at 6, Random. Honestly, there's also a slim chance that this is just a random kid that Afton killed in the incident, and they just haven't been named yet. And that this whole time we've been like being fed red herrings just to keep us talking about the series now that games aren't coming out every 3 months. And honestly, that's nothing new. Companies use that kind of marketing all the time to increase hype and discussion without really having to spend any money. I mean, look at how No Way Home was marketed, okay? I don't know how anyone would have gotten a picture of Andrew Garfield on set like that without anyone noticing, or without being connected to the company, okay? Like, in my opinion, that leaked image of him in the final fight scene had to be intentional, but the posters they were also releasing were just horrifying to start with. I mean, like, the first picture looked like something I would have made in high school, but I would have done a better job, okay? But I mean, no matter what, it worked. We were talking about how bad the poster was, and then every new poster that they had released after because they were of the same quality. And not even just nerd or news channels. Even Photoshop channels were remaking the poster in better quality. They never had to spend a dime to get us talking about that, and by making worse posters, they probably spent less on the graphics budget for those as well. So the possibility of Golden Freddy being revealed to have been possessed by a random person we've never heard of isn't out of the realm of possibility for me, alright? It could happen. Plus, it's definitely like Scott to do that. Halfway through into number 5, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Fright story The New Kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book 135 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a springlock suit for a few hours, because, you know, that wouldn't result in death normally. However, when they unleash their plan, the springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. I don't know how you were planning to lock him in there if you weren't going to use the actual spring locks, but okay. But at least they thought he was dead, since a week later Devin returns to make sure that Kelsey is still in the suit, only to find a different body inside. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different, and then Devin gets stuck and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. Yeah, it's an interesting story because while Kelsey did get spring locks, he ends up being fine, so what really happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, some think that he's the one that you should not have killed, but no matter what, we all feel like there is a high possibility that Kelsey was at least at one point possessing Golden Freddy, whether it be before the missing children's incident, afterwards, hell, maybe Kelsey possessing an animatronic is what made Afton realize that they were all possessed. Honestly, it's unknown, but given that we didn't really get a name for Golden Freddy's spirit on a grave and instead found it in a book, I guess you could say that the name Cassidy isn't set in stone. Ha, get it? You're welcome. And at 4, Nobody. The thing about hallucinations is that they're not real, and we haven't really seen Golden Freddy on any of the cameras at any point in this series. We've only seen him randomly show up in the office, even if the doors are closed and he doesn't move. The hallucinations we see are potentially because of him, but in FNAF 3, we see that those phantom animatronics are also hallucinations that are caused thanks to systems malfunctioning. And that's in a facility 30 years after the first game. So, what if Golden Freddy just isn't real? What if these are all just hallucinations that Michael is seeing due to a poor working environment and, you know, a lot of stress, and then they manifest as a version of the animatronic he feels the most guilty about because it killed his brother? I mean, it makes sense. The "it's me" would be about the animatronic. Like, it's me, the one who killed your brother, back to haunt you even more. Or it could just be him assuming that his brother would be possessing the animatronic like how the others are possessed. It would explain why we never see a physical manifestation other than in our office with obvious additional hallucinations, and it would explain why the animatronic's past is so mysterious and odd, because they aren't real. They were discontinued after FNAF 4's Bite, maybe because it was too hard for William, and it would explain why the logbook that we figured was intended to give us his name was also full of hallucinations, and why it was very clearly originally meant for Mike. Huh. Maybe I should look into that one more. It would also actually let Cassidy be the one you should not have killed, because they couldn't be possessing Golden Freddy, because Golden Freddy wouldn't be real. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Shadow Freddy. One of the oldest theories in existence, or at least FNAF-wise, FNAF 2 wise, is that the Shadow animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation could be used to describe the suit as a whole, or the individual Springlock mechanisms that are present within the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside a suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the Shadow animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the 2 animatronics that have Springlock versions. However, the other popular theory is that these are spirits who were at one point possessing their respective animatronics and got kicked out for whatever reason. This is kind of where that theory idea falls apart, because there are multiple explanations as to why they were kicked out. Some say they weren't as angry as the next ones, others say that they didn't suffer as much agony, others say it's cause the one who came next simply didn't want to share. But nonetheless, despite the improbability, it's possible, and thus can be on this list. But ultimately, in at number 2, Michael Brooks. Golden Freddy is a major character within the Silver Eyes, where unlike in the games, he's possessed by a boy named Michael Brooks. In the Silver Eyes, he's also implied to be the mascot suit used to lure children away into the back rooms. Michael Brooks is a secondary protagonist in the Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, and in the Fourth Closet, and he's one of the children killed in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is actually a childhood friend of Charlie. Michael is a little kid with a round face and rosy cheeks, with brown wide eyes that glisten, and short brown hair. Remember that one. He wears a blue t-shirt and was actually friends with the protagonists of the novel. He's actually also described as a kind and friendly person with all people in the school, despite seemingly being 5 years old at the time of the missing children's incident, since Charlie was killed at 3 years old in 1983, and assuming that they were all the same age. But one day, while he was in Freddy Fazbear's with his friends, William comes in, kidnaps him, kills him, you know the deal. But then 10 years later, his parents decide to commemorate the anniversary of his tragedy and make a scholarship dedicated to a 5-year-old kid. Interesting choice. However, notice that Michael, like I said, is described as having brown hair. And in FNAF 4, we see what is possibly a tuft of brown hair poking out of the torso of a fatter yellow animatronic. Yeah, maybe more than one Michael was subjected to William's torment. And like I said, we didn't see Golden Freddy's name on the actual grave. We only got it in what would be their name in a random book. So I mean, come on. Mike's name was also in that book. Just saying. And finally, in number 1, Cassidy. I know that I've basically been saying Golden Freddy's identity isn't guaranteed this entire time, and while technically it isn't, Cassidy is typically seen as the de facto possessor of Golden Freddy, although some also view her as the one you should not have killed, aka the one possessing Afton and keeping him alive so that he can suffer. But again, if that was the case, she wouldn't be able to possess both Golden Freddy and William, so for those of you who think both, you kinda gotta pick one. However, Cassidy's name was revealed in the FNAF Survival Logbook, an activity book with a kind of like wreck this journal vibe that seemed innocent enough at first. However, as you went through the book, you'd notice that a few things were off. There'd be random tally marks on certain pages, other pages had numbers that were highlighted in red and had the incorrect page number, and then there also seemed to be a spirit writing to us in faded text. Later on in the book, we would also see words getting switched around, and we would actually notice the repeated use of Golden Freddy's signature line of "It's me." By using the highlighted numbers as coordinates in the goddamn word search for whatever reason, we would end up spelling the name Cassidy, and then everyone's like, yep, this is Golden Freddy's name, and it's just accepted now, despite the only real connection to Golden Freddy in this book being the "It's me" line and other odd references. But after seeing 9 other options, that makes sense, for this character's actual identity, do you still think that it's Cassidy? Be sure to let me know down below, alright? If you do it respectfully, at least. In a 10, Phone Guy. While we do hear Golden Freddy's jump scare at the end of the phone recording on night 4 of FNAF 1, we also hear Freddy's music playing, the March of the Toreador that's slowed down, implying that Phone Guy actually ended up running out of power. It is possible that all the animatronics were present at the time of Phone Guy's death, and that Freddy therefore also took part in the ending of the Phone Guy, but otherwise I would suggest that Golden Freddy at least didn't work alone, as Freddy was at least there too, okay? So I mean, it would make sense 2 Freddys might team up to take down Phone Guy together, maybe sharing their victory over him because they're kind of brothers in a weird sense. But this is also supported by the stuttering and murmuring we hear on the night 5 phone call, because that sounds an awful lot like auditory hallucinations that Golden Freddy causes us to experience throughout these nights. Come on, if anyone's going to kill the Phone Guy, it's probably going to be Golden Freddy. In at 9, it's me. There are only 2 people who are really able to see this Easter egg to my knowledge, and it involves getting the Curse of Dreadbear DLC and completing a game and then being taken to the victory screen. There you'll find 3 posters reminiscent of ones from the alleyway and pizzeria simulator. However, this is where the ability to unlock this Easter egg is actually determined, okay? To be able to do this, you need 3 clown posters. All 3 of them need to be clowns, which is incredibly rare, and I mean like incredibly rare. Plus, then you need to hit them all with darts, which you only get 4 of. And if you miss 2 of them, you're boned, okay? I've looked for this Easter egg for hours on both my personal live streams and in one of our FNAF live streams here, I think. I'm pretty sure that was the thing. Since I wanted to find this myself, okay, I wanted to so badly, but I didn't, okay? Since if you manage to actually get this, the barn changes to seemingly a blacklight version where the victory banner changes to read "It's me" and everything starts glowing because of the blacklight, okay? YouTuber's Johnny Blocks, who follows me on Instagram and Twitter. What's up, Johnny? How you doing? And apparently Daco, who has no idea who I am, are the only 2 to have actually gotten this Easter egg from what I've seen and what I've been told in the comments. And not even MapHab was able to get this, and Eddie VR wasn't really trying, and neither were any of the other boys. But I mean, like, some think that this is Golden Freddy still having a hold over the FNAF world, or in this game, or wherever Glitch Trapper William is, because, you know, Golden Freddy, people think that one that you should not have killed. You know the deal, okay? I don't know. At first I thought it was a lie, but Johnny's cool, so I believe him now. And it ate Yendo. Yendo might initially appear to just be the endoskeleton of Funtime Freddy, but it is actually more likely that he is the endoskeleton of another version of Freddy that's just not suited up. As Yendo has a right hand, where normally Funtime Freddy would just have Bonbon attached. I mean he can remove it and actually put a hand on, but why would Funtime Freddy be without Bonbon? Many believe that the name Yendo, which seems to be a combination of yellow and endo, does allude to him being the endoskeleton of a golden variation of Funtime Freddy, or just maybe the original Golden Freddy endoskeleton that was removed prior to the first and second game. However, I'm pretty sure in the timeline sister location takes place after those, so I doubt it. And at 7, Fredbear is Golden Freddy. One theory that I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure was mostly at the start of the FNAF 4's release, is the theory that Golden Freddy and the Fredbear animatronic are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 are because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and then that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't actually move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child was the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, this seems to not be the case, since, you know, the characters are separate in Ultimate Custom Night and just the coloring and the size. Since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have been, since, you know, Fredbear would have to accommodate a human as well as the endoskeleton part, since it was a Springlock suit, and Golden Freddy just wouldn't, since he would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock. However, with Springtrap's design and Scrap Baby and Normal Baby, along with Scrap Trap and Springtrap being present in Ultimate Custom Night, those defenses for this are fairly shot, but considering how the Springlock suits weren't decommissioned until at least after 1985, after the Missing Children's incident, since Afton uses that to kill kids, it is unlikely that this was the case, especially considering how, you know, Afton has literally no empathy and wouldn't care that his kid died. And at 6, Possession Rules. Not Possession Rules, the rules of Possession. Possession in the FNAF universe is very interesting, however it's not something that we fully understand yet. There are a couple of things we know, like how agony is one of the most powerful emotions that stretches out further from the body than any other emotion, but we don't really know if agony grabbing hold of something, what we call possession, are really the same thing. We don't know if when you die it's your remaining agony, or if it's supposed to be your spirit that is guided through agony, and we also don't really know any other rules, if there are any, okay? You might need to be close to the thing that you're possessing, assuming that possession and agony are actually the same thing, because I mean, like, it can only reach out so far, right? But if it's not, then I don't know what the rules are. Okay, we know very little about possession in the FNAF universe, and it's probably going to stay that way, because I mean, if we knew the rules, it would mean that the series would have to be confined to those rules. But by never establishing a set of restrictions, the games can do whatever they want, and we can't really question it since they never really said it couldn't happen. Well done, Scott. Thanks. I'm not mad. Halfway through into number 5, the logbook. Some believe that there are 2 spirits possessing the security survival logbook, actual book that we can actually buy. One of them being Golden Freddy and the other one being Crying Child. But I believe that these altered texts aren't actually another spirit, since it wouldn't really make much sense for 2 spirits to communicate in different ways, but then also be a part of the same suit and then the same book, because like, what? I mean, one uses faded text and the other one alters what is already in the book, which seems to be like way more difficult than just making faded text. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're hallucinations that we're seeing from Mike's perspective and reading the book, but most believe that the other spirit is Golden Freddy, and then there's Cassidy and Crying Child in the book. I mean, like, why? Because they also believe they share the same animatronic, which also doesn't make sense. More on that later though. In it for Crying Child. Some people believe that the one possessing the Golden Freddy animatronic is Crying Child. This is mostly based on the It's Me hallucinations from FNAF 1 and the reveal that his older brother has been our player character over the first 6 games of the series, excluding FNAF 4. So why would people believe this? Well, because it would explain the line of It's Me. I literally just explained it. Why are you asking me that question? Since if we do play as Michael Afton in the first game, It's Me could just end up being Crying Child trying to communicate to his older brother who he is. It could also explain the constant use of the phrase It's Me in the security logbook, since some also believe it to be possessed by the spirit of Golden Freddy, like I just said, or the 2 spirits inside the book are 2 spirits inside Golden Freddy, which again makes no sense to me, but still. Although there is one hole I can think of in this theory is if you're trying to be like, hey bro, it's me, me, it's your little brother. Why would you then kill your big brother? I don't really know. I don't have a big brother, so maybe I don't understand. And I mean, like, Michael kind of did cause him to die, but I would get that. For the animatronic Josh shouldn't have crushed me, so who knows? Getting close to the end in number 3, the one you should not have killed. The one you should not have killed is the main, I guess, antagonist of Ultimate Custom Night. This character, who most believe to be Cassidy, is the one causing this whole situation, trapping William in his own mind while keeping him alive in order to torture him for his crimes. And while this may still be Cassidy, okay, I think it's Crying Child. I have a whole theory with all of my evidence as to why, so go check that out if you're interested. But the gist of it is, Crying Child was close to his dad when he died, not close to the Golden Freddy animatronic, and Cassidy was inside the Golden Freddy animatronic. So yeah, that makes more sense. But no matter who it is, the one you should not have killed can't actually be Golden Freddy. Because, like, while the evidence certainly seems to point us in that direction, from what we know now, William isn't in hell or in purgatory for the first game, but he's rather trapped in his own body, thanks to the man in room 1280 showing us that William can't die from the Fazbear Frights Book 5 bunny call. He's also, you know, still having a body in burn trap come security breach, so yeah, he wasn't in hell, unfortunately. I would have really liked for him to be in hell, because then I wouldn't have to deal with his scrawny burnt ass, but oh well. There is one character that's possessed multiple things, but nobody has possessed 2 animatronics at the same time, okay? And in fact, in Bunny Call, William had to die for Andrew to be able to move on to the Stitch Wraith. Plus, I mean, again, nobody has really possessed 2 things aside from William in Security Breach, and that's only because one of them was like a code brain version of him. Oh god, why is this series the way it is? But ultimately, in at number 2, Cassidy. Since the beginning of FNAF, we have been wondering about the mysterious and seemingly supernatural Golden Freddy, the entity able to travel through solid doors and walls, who gave us hallucinations and crashed our game when they got to us, okay? But who was this mysterious being? Over the years, we've gotten a few names, most notably with the gravestone ending in FNAF 6, but even with that, Golden Freddy's names always eluded us, or Golden Freddy's name has always eluded us. And if they are the one you should not have killed, or if they aren't, the name wasn't given to us in Ultimate Custom Night either, okay? Only an alias. But alas, we were finally saved when the FNAF Survival Logbook came out, where after jumping through more hoops than dogs at a dog show or dolphins at SeaWorld when they just want food, we uncovered the name Cassidy, thanks to wrong numbers on various pages becoming coordinates in the goddamn word search. It was a lot for a name reveal that honestly doesn't really mean much to the series, since the name Cassidy only appears in one other place, that place being the novel The Fourth Closet, and then a scrapped script that Scott said didn't make sense because the characters didn't matter. So yeah, Cassidy doesn't matter. I am so sorry. Blame Amanda. And finally, in at number 1, the 2-eye theory. The 2-eye theory states that in the FNAF 3 bad ending, there are 2 eyes lit up in the head in the back, which we assume is Golden Freddy, to show that there are 2 souls inside the animatronic. This isn't true, and I'm gonna tell you why, okay? Otherwise this would be a pretty short number. Firstly, it would be more difficult to tell that it was an animatronic head if only 1 eye was lit up, since, you know, all we see of this animatronic are the eyes, and it's just a reflection of the first light, since it's so dark back there, okay? Notice how Freddy also has light coming out of his other eye. Secondly, Crying Child hadn't been introduced into the series yet, not coming until the next game. That wasn't even supposed to happen until the community was disappointed with Springtrap's jump scare. And you know, this was supposed to be like the end of the series. This was supposed to put the series to bed. That's why we released the souls in the Happiest Day minigame. So, notice that only 1 person also wears the Golden Freddy mask in that minigame. And according to the official Freddy Files Updated Edition book, quote, "You'll see an image of broken animatronic heads, each with a lit eye," meaning that Golden Freddy in the back only has 1 eye lit. Alright? It's just how light works. That's how it goes. That are the fundamentals of light. It goes in every direction. That's why we see the other eye. And considering how that's the official guidebook to the series, basically the Bible of FNAF, we kinda gotta, you know, take it as law. And at 10, Phantom Freddy. The Phantom animatronics are hallucinational variants of the original animatronics who haunt Fazbear's Fright throughout the nights in FNAF 3. The Freddy Files book also seems to point out that these hallucinations appear burnt, suggesting that they're trying to warn you of what's to come. The Phantom animatronics first appeared in FNAF 3 as side antagonists. Some of them returned in Ultimate Custom Night, but they all came back in Help Wanted. However, I know what you're thinking. Connor, Isn't Phantom Freddy a version of normal Freddy, not Golden Freddy? And while at surface level you could be correct, there's actually proof against this. Phantom Freddy's model resembles Golden Freddy's appearance in the second game, due to the missing ear and the wires coming from the eyes, and even the way his head is slightly tilted to the left. This has led many people to believe that the Phantom represents Golden Freddy instead, and after brightening his jump scare you can see that Phantom Freddy is actually Golden Freddy. This also is further shown in the code, as his events are listed under Golden Freddy. In at 9, Withered Golden Freddy. Withered Golden Freddy is an antagonist in FNAF 2. Golden Freddy is an animatronic bear and children's entertainer housed at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, along with the original versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy before they get scrapped in favor of the toy animatronics. Withered Golden Freddy's appearance has not really changed much, but he does look more damaged than he did in the first game, because you know, he's missing one ear and it has a few wires coming out of his eye socket. His head also appears to be tilting to the left instead of to the right like it did in FNAF 1, but I mean, that's inconsequential. And in Ultimate Custom Night, after he appears when lowering your tablet, you gotta put it back up quickly to get rid of him, because staring at him for too long will end your run with an unpleasant surprise. That unpleasant surprise being death. In at 8, Psychic Friend Fredbear. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who you gonna call? Psychic Friend Fredbear. Fredbear plush is a plush of the Fredbear animatronic, owned by the Bite victim aka Crying Child. He first appeared in FNAF 4 and he doesn't really do anything, but he will stay on your desk and switch the currently viewed camera every few seconds, seemingly in sister location using his remote. Clicking his nose enough will prevent him from switching the camera though, meaning that you gotta love him. However, the real issue that makes him scary is his jump scare. Despite him being labeled as harmless, mess with his bigger version and he is far from it. In Ultimate Custom Night, you are able to get an item called the Death Coin that allows you to eliminate any animatronic from the game. This works with most animatronics. It removes them from play and you won't have to deal with them for the rest of the playthrough, or I guess technically life. But there is at least, to my knowledge, one animatronic this coin does not work on: Golden Freddy. If used on Golden Freddy, the Golden Fredbear plush, also known as Psychic Friend Fredbear, will jump scare you immediately, which is incredibly rude. And at 7, Yendo. Yendo might initially appear to just be an endoskeleton of Funtime Freddy, but it's entirely possible and more likely that he is an endoskeleton of another version of Freddy that is not yet suited, as Yendo has a right hand where Funtime Freddy would instead typically have Bon Bon attached. Many believe that the name Yendo, which seems to be a combination of endo and yellow, alludes to him being the endoskeleton of a golden variation of Funtime Freddy, or just the original Golden Freddy endoskeleton that was removed prior to the first and second game, which doesn't really make sense timeline wise, because why would they remove Golden Freddy's endo after the whole Circus Baby debacle, and then why would his endo be in the style of the Funtimes? So my best guess is that Yendo is intended to be a Golden Freddy version of Funtime Freddy, which lets him fit in perfectly on this list. His eyes are even yellow, so I think that this is pretty solid. And at 6, Golden Glamrock Freddy. Golden Glamrock Freddy is not a real character, but despite this, there are plenty of fan-made versions of Golden Glamrock Freddy, especially given his absence in this game along with the various golden references like the golden statue, the golden plushie, etc. Whether they just be coloring him in, changing the palette, or making him pure metal, Golden Glamrocks are all over the place on Google and other sites like DeviantArt, but don't go too deep otherwise you'll end up like me, constantly having nightmares of animatronics doing unsightly things. But at least it's a nightmare. But given the theory in Doctor Strange, if I'm having nightmares of being forced to watch animatronic coitus parties, a version of me technically actually has to suffer through that, which is a horrifying thought. I wonder if anyone ever dreams through my eyes, like any other version of me dreams through my eyes and then wakes up thinking that it was a nightmare. Halfway through into number 5, Nightmare Fredbear. One theory that I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure was mostly like a start of the FNAF 4 theory, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting the reason Golden Freddy is limp in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 are because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't physically move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child was supposed to be in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true based on the characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night, and just the coloring and the size, since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would be, since Fredbear would have to accommodate the human, whereas Golden Freddy wouldn't, since he would just be an animatronic and not a spring-lock suit. But if it is true, it allows for Nightmare Fredbear to be a version of Golden Freddy and thus be on this list. So, for this video and this video only, I will consider this true. And at 4, Sinister Golden Freddy. Sinister Golden Freddy was originally intended on releasing with the cancelled Sinister Turmoil fan game. Instead of the full game, however, we ended up getting Sinister Turmoil Sewers, which is a small section of what would have been the full game. Sinister Golden Freddy is a golden animatronic bear with a lighter shade of gold on his stomach, snout, and inside his ears. Small but very sharp teeth and no eyes. His whole suit appears to be severely withered, having large rips and tears all over the place. Like, just Christ, he really needs to like go to a tailor and get those fixed up. But Sinister Golden Freddy sports large needle-like weapons on his wrist as well, much like normal Sinister Freddy. And and also appears to have small geometrically shaped claws and nails. Sinister Golden Freddy also has a mouth with sharp but small teeth. That's the reason he's terrifying, okay? I don't like it. It's absolutely terrifying and deserves to be number 1, even over Dormitivus animatronics, but those are just an easy number 1 and I'm not trying to torture myself anymore. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Golden Call. Golden Call is more or less like Springtrap design-wise. He's a spring-locked suit with a corpse inside of him and has become a dull green due to his color rotting away, because you know, there's a corpse inside of him. Half of Golden Call's left ear is bent, causing it to stick out at an angle. His other ear is still intact. Luckily, I guess. I don't really know if that's a good thing, other than small withering on like the sides of it. His black top hat also has some withering on it, mainly towards the base and sides. He has one small hole right above his eye sockets from withering, and his holes appear to be connected to his eye sockets, meaning that his eyes are slightly bigger than normal. On the left side of his head, there is a large hole from withering. He has a bit more withering on the sides of his head too. So on the right side of his head, he has a red substance that is sticking, and also sticking to like the phone that he's holding, hence why he's named Golden Call, because he's calling someone. But this substance is most likely blood or flesh or something similar. Golden Call also has a set of endoskeleton eyes in his head that have red pupils, but the eyes of his corpse are also hanging out of the eye sockets and appear to be blue. He has a bit of withering on his snout, his lower jaw, and the edges of his lower jaw, and then he has like organs inside of him, but like I don't know what organs these are. His entire torso is also heavily worn, and his pelvis has a single hole in the front that reveals to be like some form of blood vessel or muscle, and I don't even want to know what was there originally. Penultimately, in at number 2, Great Escape Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy returns as an enemy in FNAF AR Special Delivery and as a playable character in Freddy in Space 2. But Great Escape Golden Freddy, or for short simply Great Escape Freddy, is the first skin Golden Freddy has gotten in FNAF AR. He received this skin as a part of the special mixed reality DLC game mode Dark Circus Encore that released in December 13th, 2021. He's available exclusively through purchasing and beating the DLC content. Great Escape Golden Freddy is identical to Golden Freddy in coloration, still being yellow, but is now a much duller shade, with black and green splotches on his head, legs, and feet. His head is severely withered in multiple areas, with most of it deteriorated or missing, including half of his top hat. His eye sockets are also completely empty, the holes going through the endoskeleton head, and a chain is running through his mouth. He wears a brown straitjacket and multiple golden chains running around it, like a G. With many locks, boxes, and giant metallic collars around his neck, these chains also run down his upper legs, and he looks like he's like dangling from them. It's genuinely one of, if not the scariest skin in FNAF AR, and it's a mobile game, so it takes a lot of time to actually make it scary, but this does it. Good job. And finally, in at number 1, Am I Real? Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where Freddy delivers cake to children. However, Am I Real's second form, Am I Real, is a form that much resembles Springtrap, and it also appears to be some form of Golden Freddy animatronic. This form is mostly comprised of a drab green like Springtrap, and similarly has exposed human remains inside. His right eye socket has gotten larger on the side of his head, and there's a big hole that can be seen on the right side of his head, because of course there is. If you want to make an animatronic scary, you just take bits away. His top hat has received some withering on it as well. His lower jaw is slanted and worn down, no longer circular like Cake Bear's, and he has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso too, revealing his organs. Rips and tears cover his arms, revealing even more human remains, and he's just disgusting. He's meant to be a spring-lock suit, but at the time that this game was released, we didn't have Fredbear as a character, meaning that this is definitely intended to be a Golden Freddy. I originally stumbled upon this idea when researching more about my Michael Afton as a robot crying child theory, but this has nothing to do with that. I'm just providing context. The main piece of evidence I was looking for was that Cassidy would not share a vessel. So if Cassidy was possessing Golden Freddy, the amount of anger and agony that Cassidy has would not allow for another soul to possess the suit alongside her, no matter who it was, even if it was her killer's son, especially not her killer's son. So it's just Cassidy possessing Golden Freddy, I hear you asking? Because this would just be circumstantial and based on your opinion of how you see the character of Cassidy. You could see her as being more than willing to share the suit with William's son since they both suffered the same wickedness, right? Yes, and that is entirely true, except I have some ideas that would present an entirely different solution to this problem. Allow me to explain. Fazbear Frights has given us hints as to how the game world operates over the last year or so. So far, with 9 books in the series being released, with the 10th coming out on my birthday this year and an 11th shortly after. However, there is one book that I'd like to call attention to, and I'm sure you can all tell which one it's gonna be. In room 1280 of Heracles Hospital, something evil is keeping a man alive. a man with gruesome burns all over his body, and an iron will to live. The Man in Room 1280 is the third story in the fifth Fazbear Frights book, Bunny Call, the only Fazbear Frights book that I currently own, for good reason. I have the 10th pre-ordered though, don't worry. The story, written by Andrea Wagner, revolves around a man with, as the book's summary described, horrific burns all over his body. His organs are exposed, his face is missing, he has burn marks all over his body, and this man was taken off life support years prior to the story, yet somehow is still alive. The story ends with this horrifically damaged man being taken to a Fazbear Entertainment distribution center where he promptly explodes. This story is obviously meant to represent, or very well be, William Afton, who did end up escaping the FNAF 6 fire but was horrifically damaged because of it. The story was meant to show us that William had a soul possessing him, the soul of a young boy with curly black hair, rosy cheeks, and an alligator mask. The mask being in reference to the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 2. This explained how William always came back, how he survived the spring locking, the FNAF 3 fire, the FNAF 6 fire, and how he possessed a hard drive to be scanned in FNAF VR. He was taken to the warehouse before his death. But one thing always really bothered me about this story. Who is that kid? From what I understand in the epilogue, the boy then becomes a second soul inside of the Stitch Wraith, and that's what made everyone think that Golden Freddy had two souls, but I don't think that's what the story was trying to tell us. There's always been some form of confusion around the one you should not have killed, the one who keeps torturing William in Ultimate Custom Night. We all thought that it was Cassidy, who we assumed to be Golden Freddy, who was the one doing it, that she had trapped William in purgatory and was making him relive the horrors that he caused over all those years. But that, with the release of this book, was disproven, since William wasn't in purgatory or hell, but rather his own mind, stuck in the hospital either on life support or just being kept alive by this spirit, meaning that this kid would have to be the main antagonist of that game, the one that we see shaking at the end if we manage to beat 50-20 mode. This presents two different outcomes, neither of which are what we first expected though. It's weird, but I'm gonna go over them, don't worry. First, the simple answer. The kid from the Fazbear Frights books was just a deviation meant to show us that William was possessed by someone, showing us how he was kept alive, meaning that someone in the games would most likely be Cassidy, and the one you should not have killed was not Golden Freddy. Cassidy in this case would not be able to be Golden Freddy, since while multiple souls can possess one thing in FNAF canon, we have not seen evidence that one soul can possess multiple things. In fact, that has been disproven time and time again in the series, with the puppet having to give life to the animatronics after they've had a soul, or I guess agony, inside of them. This would mean that Golden Freddy was either possessed by another soul, or that everything having to do with Golden Freddy is an illusion. The other outcome would be that this kid from the books, the boy with the alligator mask, is Crying Child. That William's son, after being sent to the hospital and put in a coma by Fredbear, went on to possess his father and keep him alive after learning of his misdeeds. This is just as likely a scenario for me, if not even more likely, since it explains a lot of what we hear and see from characters in Ultimate Custom Night, such as Nightmare Fredbear, whose appearance should only be known to the Crying Child, but it presents itself in William's nightmare, as well as multiple lines such as "We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them," which is in reference to when the Crying Child dies at the end of FNAF 4, when psychic friend Fredbear says, "We are still your friends, do you still believe that?" But remember that those Fredbear plushies are actually cameras created by William to watch his son, meaning that this line, if it was coming from Fredbear, would really be coming from William, as would the line "I will put you back together," which is also referenced in Ultimate Custom Night, when Nightmare Fredbear says, "I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed." How would Cassidy know about this line, about the "I will put you back together," about the appearance of any of the Nightmare animatronics for that matter, unless she had seen them herself? If this was Crying Child, it would make a whole heck of a lot of sense, especially because of that line, "I am remade, but not by you." It sounds sassy, like I was remade, but you didn't do it like you said you would. Like if your friend falls through on a promise, so then you say like, "Oh, I went bowling, but not with you." I have a friend who does that a lot. He's not even really a friend anymore, just because he is not really a good person. He's not watching, so it's fine. This also explains Nightmare's line of "the shadow fears me," which I originally thought was meant to be about William fearing death, since the purple of the purple guy was meant to represent a shadow. But the one thing that made me sure about this theory was the fact that the alligator mask boy from the man in room 1280 is described as a shadow. If this is the crying child who was being referenced as a shadow, it would explain this line. Nightmare is the final antagonist of FNAF 4, the one that crying child fears the most, the representation of death, of William's wickedness. The crying child has to be the one who possesses William. I mean, it makes sense. William was there when crying child died. The Golden Freddy suit wasn't, but William was. When crying child died in the hospital, we know that from his lines going through psychic friend Fredbear, he was there with his son. As for why Golden Freddy is moving at the end of the game though, that could simply be a visual way of showing us that William would be back in the next game, by having one of his victims convulsing. Or it could be crying child showing William a version of the Fredbear plush. I think that this has to be the explanation, and if not, then Scott needs to fix his narrative structure, because not only does this make sense, it works in a story sense as well, and honestly fits so many things into place and feels good in a narrative sense. There we have it, friends, my explanation as to how we were wrong about Golden Freddy. This theory makes so much sense to me, and honestly I didn't expect to come to that conclusion. The idea that I had in my head going into it was totally different than when I finished. The one you should not have killed is crying child. I mean, even William would consider him the one that you should not have killed. Damn. And if you're interested in more theories about the FNAF movie, be sure you check out the list on that topic, okay? It's popping up on your screen now. Thanks for watching.